Uh, okay. Welcome, everyone. Um, also, so pleased that Skyline folks have joined us. Um, a, a few logistics, and then I'll give a little background about the program, and then we'll get started. You heard that we're recording this right now, and we'll send this to you either at the end of this week or next week for both of them. I believe the closed captioning is on. Please write any questions that you have into the chat box, and Susan Blumberg-Hayson will be monitoring that. Deborah, our speaker, has been gracious enough that if there's anything urgent that she feels should be answered, go ahead and do it during the program. Otherwise, we'll get them all at the end. And I think that's all of the logistics. Amy and I were talking about various social issues that we can be involved in. And we kept, well, how do we talk about aging, and what happens if I can't climb up and get things down from my top shelf? Is it time for me to move? And the program just expanded to two parts, like, how do you talk about this? And then next week, Phyllis Mitzen and Brad Winnick are going to be talking about, okay, you've decided not to stay in your house and all the logistics and options about that. And we're considering a third session that we'll talk about at the end of next week when we do some follow-up on it. And I'm going to turn it over to Amy Kleinman, who will introduce our speaker. Thank you all.
Thank you. We are so pleased that we have such a great turnout.
Yes.
This is wonderful. So welcome to part one of our series on living your fullest life while aging. Our speaker, Deborah Feldman, has multiple advanced degrees in social work and care management, and she is also president of the board of the Aging Life Care Association. As a geriatric care specialist, Deborah works with families and individuals to make the plans and decisions that maximize independence, ensure quality of care, promote dignity, security, and peace of mind for all concerned. Tonight, Deborah has a thoughtful presentation for us on the challenging conversations about aging, after which she will answer as many of your questions as possible. As Beth said, please keep yourself on mute and put all of your questions into the chat box. As a follow-up to our two-part program, we will be sending you a summary along with many, many informational links. So don't worry if you don't get all of your questions answered this evening. We are thrilled to have Deborah with us.
Thank you, Amy. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and put up my PowerPoint. Okay. Can everybody see that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
All right. So I want to really start out this evening and thank Amy Kleinman and Debbie Levinson for inviting me to speak. And for actually having the opportunity to meet all of you as well. As Amy started to share with you, and first of all, I really am excited to be able to share some ideas tonight about how and why it is important to have conversations about how you want to live as you grow older. As Amy mentioned, I am an aging life care manager, also known as a geriatric care manager. And I've been working with older adults and their families to help them, educate them, guide them, and handhold them through their aging journeys. I've been having challenging conversations about aging for over 30 years. And these conversations are different for each family or individual I talk to. The one thing that I realized is that the conversation has been normalized for me. Not only do I have these conversations with clients in my own family, I have them all the time when I meet new people or talk with friends and colleagues. As soon as someone knows the work I do, the conversations just begin. A few weeks ago, I was out of town for a college friend's son's wedding and talking with people I really didn't know very well. They asked me what I do, and as I shared with them about the work I do with older adults and their families, these couples started to share their stories and experiences that they had had working as caregivers for their own parents. One couple shared that as they had been caring for their parents and in-laws and having to help them make difficult decisions, that they had started thinking about their own aging and how they want to live. They shared that they wanted to not be a burden to their children. And one couple had started thinking about moving into a continuum of care community before they need help so that they can downsize and have activities easily accessible to them. The thought of going to the theater and not having to drive sounded really nice. And the ability to access mahjong and bridge or canasta games seemed like a wonderful opportunity. And even having a built-in social life. So, how do we start normalizing these conversations? My family has had the fortune, I believe, for these conversations to be normal. My children, husband, and my mom have conversations about aging all the time, and they just occur randomly. A few weeks ago, I was visiting with my mom, and she shared with me that a really good friend, a close friend of hers, had passed away, and this friend's daughter has a high-end resale shop. So she said, you know, when I die, I want you to call this woman and bring my clothes to her and have her sell my clothing. And when my grandmother passed away some 20 years ago, my mom said to me, you know, I want that casket. I want the same type of casket that grandma's in to be buried in. And I also want that same color headstone. So my mom and I have conversations at various times when things come up. When friends of hers encounter different health issues and just at random times. I am really fortunate about this and realize how lucky she is to have me as her advocate and how lucky I am to have her and the fact that we've become a team as she's aging. I also talk with my children about quality of life and what that looks like for me. Several years ago, I was visiting with my son and I shared with him that if I can't feed myself, please don't wake me to eat. Let me eat when I'm hungry and when I ask you to bring me some dinner or a meal. And this request really came as a result of my visiting a client in a nursing facility, often during lunchtime. There was this very nice nursing aide helping one of the residents with his lunch. However, the resident seemed to be napping during many of these noontime visits. And this nursing aide would very gently and rub this man's arm and wake him up so that he would take a spoonful of food. The resident didn't complain. It really wasn't a big deal. He would wake up, take a spoonful of food, swallow it, and proceed to doze off again until the aide woke him again. And this happened every time I would come and visit. And I didn't understand all the dynamics, but it really bothered me. And so I told my son the story and I asked him to make sure that that was never done to me. So we've had many more in-depth conversations about what quality of life looks like for me and what I want. And I know these conversations will continue to evolve as I age. And the other kind of funny story that I thought I would share too, as we were talking, Amy and Beth and Susan and I were a couple, and Debbie Levinson was on we were kind of chatting beforehand and thought, we can make this a little light and a little uplifting. Well, one of the jokes that I always said, or a conversation that I had with my daughter, she was probably 15 or 16, and you have to realize that my children have grown up with me, working with older adults and family. And so they hear stories all the time. And so my daughter and I were joking and laughing and talking. And I said, when I get old, and I need a caregiver. I want some handsome punk with six-pack abs taking care of me. And my husband came walking into the kitchen shortly, like having heard part of this, and he said to her, well, what are you going to do for me? And she looked at him honestly and said, you've never asked. You've never had the conversation. So I don't know what you want. So I laugh about it, and we can laugh about it, but the point here really is that we have to have the conversation. And there's no, the conversation can happen throughout. I recently did a podcast and talking about normalizing conversation. And what bothered me about this podcast was that I just kept talking about my family. And I'm a professional, and I felt like I should be talking about my clients and how I deal with this with clients. But I realized, and I couldn't put my finger on what it was and why I kept talking about my family in these conversations. And the reason is that it's a normal conversation for me. And so the question becomes here, and what this discussion is tonight is really, how do you, all of you that are on this call, learn to have these conversations and for them to be just normal and come up randomly throughout your visits with your family. And some of this too is to really think that it's, and I have learned that it's actually a gift to share and to have these conversations with our family. So wouldn't you really rather make decisions for yourself instead of your children making them for you? And it's also very important to keep in mind that these conversations are ongoing. I know we change our minds and opinions and thoughts as we ourselves age. So it's not a one and done conversation. And circumstances that we encounter also guide us and make us think differently. And so we want to keep evolving with these conversations and to have them often. So some of the things that we're going to go over tonight is why we really want to talk about your preferences in advance, and how to, some different ideas about how to have the challenging conversations. We're going to talk about resistance, because I keep hearing either the older adult is resisting or kids are resisting to talk about aging and end of life, and really put forth the consequences of not talking. We're going to talk a little bit about focusing on what really matters most to us, and touch briefly about how to select your healthcare proxy, your healthcare power of attorney, as well as your power of attorney for property. I know that some of this will be in much more detail next week, but I wanted to just kind of touch on, because it's all part of conversation, just giving you a brief overview of housing options and really briefly on how to pay for care. So let's get started here and talk about why it's important to talk about your preferences in advance, early, before you're in a crisis. So communication is the key to having a life you want to lead. And as I've said, and I'm going to probably repeat this over and over again tonight, it is a gift to our children to share our wishes. By telling our decision makers, mostly our children, and in some cases our spouses, what our wishes are, it alleviates their guilt at the end of your life, and hopefully prevents a lot of fighting between your children. You'll provide your children with the roadmap and the directions on how you want your life to, how you want to end your life with dignity, peacefully, and hopefully without pain. Your children will not be making the decisions. Rather, they will be executing the decisions you ask them to make. And of course, this can only occur if you've talked about your preferences in advance. So here are a few main reasons to talk about these decisions and your thoughts before a crisis happens. Having completed or I know, and many know that just because you've completed a healthcare power of attorney and a living will, it's not enough information and direction for your proxy. You also have to have conversations, and several conversations with them, so that they thoroughly understand your wishes. And the conversations will make it easier for everyone to respect your wishes. Having the talk will also help you really think about what matters most to you and help you truly formulate your wishes. It will allow for clarifying questions to be asked of you, and it will also allow for you to have more insight and thought. It will help your loved ones make difficult decisions with less pain, doubt, anxiety, and guilt. Having these conversations may even bring your family closer together. It'll help make sure that all children and parents are on the same page and working together as a team. And finally, and most importantly, you get to make the decision. Not someone else is making the choices for you.
Deborah, can I just interrupt? Kathy has a question. Who do you have the conversation with if you don't have children and your friends and your husband are older than you?
Well, you still could have the conversation with your friends and your husband, because you don't know where life is leading us. And then you need to figure out and identify somebody that's going to be your proxy. And in some cases, it could be a professional. But that needs to be, that's something really important. And I will kind of talk a little bit about that later too, but that is really important for solo and like even solo agers, to have somebody that becomes their power of attorney for healthcare as well as property. And there are professionals that will act in those capacities. So I have and do on occasion act as a proxy for healthcare. So there are people out there that can do that. So how do we have these conversations? There's really no right way to start the conversation, nor is there really a right time. And you definitely want to start the conversations prior to a crisis. It's really difficult when you're in that crisis mode for somebody to be able to really listen and to hear what you're saying. They're feeling very panicked and really can't think clearly. So we want to talk about and continue talking about normalizing these conversations. What is the best approach? And it will most likely be very different for each family. Amy Kleinman, one of our hosts this evening, shared an article with me that she read in the Wall Street Journal recently. It was actually written and put in the journal November 14th. And it was called How to Give Your Parents Advice that they will actually listen to. The woman that wrote it, her name is Francine Russo. It's a great article. And what I took away from this article is that you want to address your parents with questions, not give them answers. You want to show your parents respect and validate their decision, even when you may wish they addressed their situation differently. And as difficult as it may be, you want to keep your own anxiety or emotion out of this conversation. Some of the information that you may want, that you're going to want to gather during your conversations with your parent, and vice versa, sharing it with your children, are the following. And one of the ways that you can start these conversations is to use a what if. For example, what if you had difficulty taking care of yourself? Would you consider hiring a caregiver? And have you thought about how much that might cost? Do you have the means to afford this? And I know that people don't like talking about money. The older generation and for me at this point, the generation that is my senior, really money was never talked about. It's always been kind of kept in the closet, and we really don't know what our parents have and how well they can care for themselves. But it's really important to talk about money in order to be able to make a plan and to know what our options and what our options are. Another question might be, what if you had difficulty taking care of yourself? Would you consider moving into a senior community? Would you consider moving closer to one of your children? Maybe all your children live out of state, or as is the case in Chicago, you could be living an hour away from your kids. And so you may consider moving closer to them. Other ways that an adult child could start a conversation with their parent might be to begin by sharing a story about when he or she was talking with a friend whose parent was just recently hospitalized with a stroke. And this friend is having to make some decisions about how their parents will be cared for. So I'm going to circle back again. Remember, if we've had these conversations, the children aren't making the decisions for the parents. They're helping execute the decisions the parents had made. But in many of our situations that we're encountering, that's not what's happening. We're seeing the kids having to come in and make the decisions for their parents because they never had the conversation. These conversations can be the reverse, where the older adult wants to have a conversation with their adult child. And the adult child might not be ready to start thinking about their parents aging or have the conversation. So the older adult could use pretty much a similar story and say that, their friend had a stroke, and the friend's adult children have come and swooped in and have started making decisions for them. And this could be a real nice opening to having a conversation. And again, as I keep repeating, we really don't want others making decisions for us. We all come to this point in our lives where we're feeling very independent. We're independent individuals. I have families and prospective clients coming to me and saying, my mom is stubbornly independent, or she's fiercely independent, and don't want her kids making decisions for her. But she's waited too long to be able to make decisions for herself because she's got cognitive decline. And so now the kids are having to come in and make those decisions, in spite of the fact that she's fiercely independent. So we have to continue to have these conversations. And again, in talking with your children, or the reverse true, the same, having the reverse conversation, is sharing with them how much of a gift it is for your family to know what you're thinking and feeling and wanting for yourself as you age. These conversations are going to require a lot of patience on your part, and you'll have to become a really good listener. It may be easiest to do some of this by having short conversations during your visit, tackling one concept or question at a time. You may just say, during one of your visits, that a friend of yours, his father just hired a caregiver, and they were talking about expenses, and you never realized how expensive it is. And you could then kind of gently start launching into a conversation about money and savings. Another conversation or another occasion, you could share that you met with your estate planning attorney and completed your own power of attorney documents for both healthcare and property, and you began to prepare your will. And you never realized all that went into preparing these documents and all the specific healthcare questions that were brought up and had to be answered. You could share that you never realized how expensive it was to be supported when you get older, costs for the caregivers and senior housing. You may start a conversation and just kind of drop some seeds, drop a few little ideas here and there, and leave, and leave that conversation for a later time, and come back again at a later date and kind of have that conversation again, and maybe approach it from a different angle. And we know that resistance is so very common. Adult children resisting the conversation. They don't want to think about their parents dying. And if they talk about it, bad things will happen. And the reverse is true too. The older adult refuses to have the conversation for superstitious reasons. And I've encountered people that have never prepared a will because of that. They don't want to think about their aging and their dying. And I can't tell you the mess that's left behind after someone dies without having proper paperwork completed. Talking about illness or death and dying is just too painful. So we can always talk about it later, is what a child may say or a parent will say. But we must remember that putting off for tomorrow what you can do today, we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. Aren't we really better off being able to make decisions for ourselves instead of allowing others to make them for us? So some of the additional responses to the resistance is saying, I know this conversation or this discussion makes you feel really uncomfortable, but it's important to me that we talk about this. Another comment could be, how we live is in our hands, and that's why I need to talk with you about it. And then you can also share and think about, like, what are the consequences of not talking? Your wishes will not be considered. You may be on life support and never wanted to be. You will cause a lot of anxiety, distress, guilt for your adult children, potentially a lot of discourse between your children, having differing opinions. If you don't talk about it now, you could end up in a much more uncomfortable situation. And the biggest one is someone else will make the decision for you. For some people, this is okay, but for many others, it is not. So in having these conversations, and things for us to start thinking about for ourselves are, what is most important to you as you age and as you near end of life? What do you value the most? And what are 3 most important concepts that you want your friends, family, and or doctors to understand about your wishes and preferences as you age and for end of life care?
I'm sorry, Deborah, again, something came up. Elena has a question that relates to this. The concepts that you want your friends and family or doctor to understand. So she said, if she doesn't want to make decisions that will be difficult on her kids. So would it make sense to discuss these options with her kids, but also like take into consideration about, what they're comfortable doing?
So I in thinking about that, I guess you know, everybody's going to approach this in a different way. And maybe if your children aren't going to be the ones that are comfortable moving forward on a decision that, let's say, and we'll go end of life and talk about life support. If your children are going to, if you know that your children could not take you off life support, and you know for yourself that you never want to be on life support, then you don't select those children to be your proxy. You really want to select somebody who will adhere to your wishes. And that becomes very difficult. And part of the having the conversations is to be able to help your children not feel guilty if they have to make that tough life ending choice, because they're executing what you asked them to do. I hope that helps. Which I was actually just going to kind of go into selecting your healthcare proxy and power of attorney for property, which has to do, continues on with the question that was just posed. You really want to choose someone who will talk with you now about your wishes and who will understand what you want and really follow through as you want them to, and as you ask them to do. You want to choose someone you trust with your life, and someone who can handle conflicting opinions from family members, friends, and medical personnel. Your personal wishes may be different than what that doctor is saying in the hospital, and you may have to, that your proxy is going to have to advocate against what the doctor's wishing or recommending or suggesting. Our medical system is such that doctors are trained, and it's a good thing, and sometimes that's what we want, is to have all of those treatments and all of that care, and that's fine, and I don't disagree with that either. But doctors are trained to save lives. And sometimes we get to the point in our life where it's not worthwhile saving, because the quality of your life is not going to be such that you want to be there. And that decision is different for everybody. And what we're talking about here tonight is start thinking about it, because you want to be able to kind of pass your wishes and thoughts and kind of how you feel about this to your healthcare proxy, so they can advocate on your behalf. As I'm saying here, you want to make sure that you're choosing someone that will make the decisions the way that you would make them if you're able to make them for yourself. And a couple of things that I've learned over the years with the work that I do with clients and families is that I have seen situations where an older adult has selected their eldest child to be their healthcare proxy, and that eldest child was not the right person. That person may not have, they selected them because it's the oldest child and that's what they thought they should do, but that child was not keeping their best interest at heart. And the other children, and I've seen where other children have come in and really have been opposed to the decisions that the healthcare proxy is making, and have taken them to court, to the point where guardianship was then fought for and won, and things kind of changed. So you want to think about who you're selecting and not just pick the person because they're the oldest. And something else to really keep in mind, and I've had this occur a few times, where parents had two children and they felt like it would be like really fair to pick one child as power of attorney for healthcare and the other child as power of attorney for property. And the two children hate each other and don't get along at all. And all they do is fight with each other and don't take into consideration at all what is in the best interest of their parent. And the parent doesn't get proper care. So really consider how you're making those selections. Sorry for bringing that up, but it's really frightening when it happens. And there's not a whole lot that can, I mean, you wind up going to court and you don't want to wind up in court. So this is a list that I had pulled off from the American Bar Association. It had like this, I mean, it was just, I was like really thrilled when I saw this list. And these different tools really have some great questions in them and can be very useful in having conversations, in enabling you to start thinking about all the different options that are out there with regards to healthcare decisions and how to really advocate for yourself when you're able to continue advocating and write things out so that your family members and proxy are able to execute your wishes. So the first one on here is called What Matters Most letter. And it was put out by the Stanford Letter Project. And it asks questions about like what matters most to me, and it's what's important, like what milestones in your life are coming up that you're looking forward to and you really want to be there for. Grandchild's graduation, grandchildren, or great grandchildren, or grandchildren marrying, or your children marrying. And really sitting down and just writing out different thoughts and formulating it. And this letter in particular is addressed to your physician so that your physician has an idea of what your wishes are as well. Because a lot of times we're in our doctor's offices and we have 5-10 minutes or 15 minutes at the most to sit and talk with them. And we don't have an opportunity beyond looking at what our medical problem is at the moment to really start talking about our wishes down the road. And your primary care doctor may be the one helping to make some of those decisions and helping to guide your family members. So this letter is a really nice outline of questions and things to look at. And then the next one on here, it's called Prepare for Your Care. And when this one is executed, this is something that you can do for yourself. Apparently it is stated as being legally binding. And so again, this goes through a lot of different, it talks about how to choose your medical decision maker and things to ask your decision maker about and questions to ask yourself, things to answer. It goes through this whole idea about being aware of the fact that when you are no longer able to make decisions for yourself, that your decision maker is going to choose your doctors, your nurses, hospitals, treatment, tests. They're able to make decisions on medications you can take. So they're making decisions about whether or not they're going to assign a do not resuscitate order. And so what I like about these documents is they're just great ways you don't even have to fill them out. It's nothing else, just take a look at them. And you can print them all out and really kind of go through that for yourself. The conversation project is also, it was put together, and I don't know if it's been updated, but it was put together about 10 years ago. But again, it has great questions to ask, conversations to have, some of what I went over today, but other conversations to sit down and have with your family members. And the 5 wishes are listed on here as well, which is the end of life medical treatment guide, and really helpful for you to go over and review. And it's a great guideline to sit down and talk with after you've gone through it yourself, but then just sit down, and easy way to kind of go through it with your family members. So these are just some really wonderful tools. And I thought I would just take a couple minutes as I'm wrapping up here to just like review some of the different housing options that are out there. The first one, of course, is just staying in your own home and paying for and having private care in your home if you need that. And then there are the various different types of senior communities that you can move into. The first one really is talking about the rehabilitation facilities. You've gone into the hospital, had a hip fracture, and now you need to go to a facility to get some additional therapies before going home. So that's a community, as well as the long-term care skilled nursing home. The rehab facilities and the skilled nursing homes, that's one building. The rehab portion of it typically is separated from the long-term care residents. And then we have now there are these standalone assisted living communities. Some of them have memory care components in there. Others are straight assisted living. And sometimes you'll see retirement communities, which are apartments, where within that retirement community, they may have an area that's set aside for assisted living apartments. And the assisted living really is just, often there are caregivers that are available around the clock, and there are usually nurses there, typically about 12 hours a day, an actual RN that's dispensing that. And then there are memory care assisted living communities that are standalone. And then finally, you have the continuum of care retirement communities, which are typically buy-ins. And then you'll buy in and live in the independent living, and then can continue on through the continuum of care as you continue to need more assistance. And then to pay for your care, most care is private pay. Some individuals have taken out long-term care insurance, and that will cover for a portion of your caregivers in your home, or for assisted living or skilled nursing care. In rehabilitation, if you're going for rehabilitation, that's usually covered by Medicare. And then there's Medicaid. Medicaid will cover for skilled nursing, or also there are some assisted living communities that are called supportive living facilities, and Medicaid will pay for your living in those communities. And one thing to keep in mind with the supportive living communities is that those are assisted living homes that really, if you have memory care or need memory care assistance, it really does not provide for that. And then finally, there's a community care program for individuals that are in their homes still, that have low income and minimal assets. And this is state-run program that will help provide some caregiving for you in your home. And I have some questions that have been provided to me that I thought I would go through. And then we can circle back, Susan, and you can share some of the questions that have been put out in the chat. And maybe some of this will be addressed as well. So the first question that was posed to me is, I live alone and have no children. I'm happy, healthy, and independent. My friends tell me to prepare for the future. What does that mean? And what should I be doing now? So one of the first things that comes to mind would be that you would want to have an estate plan put together. And in that estate plan, you would want to make sure that you have your power of attorney for healthcare and property, have a will, possibly set up some sort of a trust so that you've got somebody that's able to come in and financially take over when you are no longer capable of paying your bills and managing your finances. You're going to want to have some sort of a financial plan to know what kinds of means you have to be able to care for yourself when you're in that situation where you can no longer care for yourself. So, to make sure that you have the funds to pay for a caregiver or move into a retirement community or assisted living. And you're going to want to start thinking about that. If you're alone and a solo ager, you may want to start thinking about how do I want to see myself when I can't maybe take care of myself or prior to that. The idea I've had over the years, I've encountered individuals where they decided to move into a retirement or a continuum of care so that they move in there, they know they can afford to live there, and then they'll be able to continue to live there, go through the continuum as they need more assistance, and they're already set and in place. Another thing to do, and I'm going to promote myself, but would be to really hire an aging life care manager. And I've had situations where I've had clients. I had a client, and sadly she passed away about 2 years ago, but she hired me 10 years before she really needed me. She had a financial advisor who recommended that she contact me. And I became like her. She really had a cousin that lived out of state and never married and no kids and no siblings. And so I became that support system for her. And I did not carry healthcare power of attorney for her. And I was not her power of attorney for property. Her financial advisor managed her finances. And she had a friend that was her healthcare power of attorney, as well as a cousin of hers. But I stepped in to be that advocate and to really handhold her and guide her. But so 10 years prior to her needing me, she met with me, talked to me. I knew what her wishes were. We talked about, how she wanted to live should she need assistance. We met a couple times a year, twice a year for the most part, had lunch together, updated me on her health. And then all of a sudden, her life like flipped upside down. She'd been going along smoothly, managing everything. And then one day she wasn't managing things anymore. It was really kind of an odd experience for me, but she had Alzheimer's disease and she had functioned all along for a really long time. And all of a sudden, it was at that point where she couldn't handle and manage her own affairs anymore. So she had me in her back pocket, pulled me out, said I need help. And I came in and together we hired caregivers. So she was able to stay in her home like she always wanted to. And I handheld her through the end of her life. So finding somebody like myself is really valuable. And in some situations, I may not be doing all of it, but at least I'm providing that guidance and support. So another question that was posed is, my mother sometimes forgets. She forgets where she's going when she's driving, and she's had a few fender benders. She needs to stop driving, but I don't know how to convince her of that. And she'll need alternatives to get around. So that's always a tough one. I know I had this conversation one day. I was talking to my mom, and I said to her, I had this situation with a client where the kids had to take the car keys away from mom. And my mother on the other end of the phone said to me, "You will never, and I mean never, take my car keys away." And I thought to myself, she's still driving. She's still capable of driving. She'll be 85 next week and is still managing well and living independently. But I know there may come that day where I'm going to have to take the car keys away. Hopefully, she will recognize it herself and I don't have to do that. But a lot of times what I recommend for families to try and do is for them to talk with their family member's doctor and indicate to them that they're starting to see changes in their mom, that you've noticed, or she's called because she's gotten lost, and that she's had some fender benders, and you'd like some assistance in removing the car keys. And many good doctors will step in and help do that. In this case too, it sounds to me like mom needs to be evaluated by a neurologist and should get in to see somebody pretty quickly to really adjust, because if she's having troubles driving, she's having troubles doing a lot of other things as well. There are transportation assistants out there. There are a few people out there that drive seniors. I have a couple of resources. I mean, one throwing out there, there's a gentleman in Buffalo Grove area. His company is called Ed on Call, and I'll call him up and he'll take clients of mine to the grocery store or doctor's appointments. Wonderful individual. So there are people like him that have small companies out there. You can find a private taxi driver, and there are many out there that you can just hire to take your family member to and from appointments and family gatherings, things along those lines. And then the other thing is in this situation, it might be necessary at this point for mom to have a caregiver, and maybe you just hire a caregiver to work with her 4 hours a day, a couple days a week. And during those are the times where she goes to the grocery store to a doctor's appointment. Another question is, and I guess I can stop sharing my screen so I don't need to keep looking at that. Another question that came to me is, whenever my kids and their families are here for the holidays, I try to show them where I keep my important papers, my will, deed to the house, POA documents, and I try to talk with them about my wishes for the future. They respond that they don't want to discuss depressing stuff and change the subject. How do I get them to listen? Well, we've talked a lot about that tonight. But I would really state to them that you realize that the discussion makes you feel uncomfortable too, but it's important that you have the conversation and share the information with them. You could also suggest going over these issues at another time when it's not the holidays, and so that you keep the holidays joyful, and you make a specific date with them to go through that on just any day of the week. And you really want to kind of push through that and not let them keep giving you excuses, and really share with your children how important it is for you that they know what's going on. Another question that came in is, I work full time and have middle school age kids at home who need my attention, and my parents are experiencing health issues, and I can't be there for them as much as I'd like. I'm having trouble juggling everything. What can I do? Again, I'll promote myself, truthfully, but like hiring a care manager really is beneficial. We can come in there, take over the day-to-day, manage the day-to-day, kind of oversee all of that, and allow you to come in and spend quality time with your parents. And really kind of help things run more smoothly, or get in there and organize and put you on a path. And then as the daughter, you come back in and are able to manage things much easier. But having put a plan in place. Another question that came through is, I think my father should move to a senior community. He's been lonely and antisocial since my mother passed away, but he doesn't want to leave their home because it holds so many memories. The house is too much for him, and I worry that he's not interacting with others. How do I get him interested and possibly excited about moving? One of the things that first came to mind with that question is that maybe dad needs or could benefit from some grief counseling and finding a therapist to start out with and helping him be able to talk about his feelings and loss. He's gone through a lot of loss. And you could start discussing with your dad your concern. Share the fact that you see him staying at home and how hard that is, and how badly you feel seeing him all alone. And talk about it. What do you think? Would maybe going to a senior community be a good idea? Do you want to go take a look at them with me? Let's go check it out together. So do it as a team. Again, none of us want our children coming in and telling us what to do. So if we approach with questions and share our concerns about what we're seeing with them and how much we care about them, and then listen to hear what they have to say and do it as a team and do it together. Another question that came through was, my parents live in a different state from me, and I worry about them and have no way to know if they're healthy and if they're following their doctor's orders. And if I need to find them in-home care, how do I find the right people? And how do I manage long distance caregiving? Again, I'll say find an aging life care manager. I am actually part of a national association, and I have colleagues throughout the country. My brothers and I took advantage of an aging life care manager many years ago when my father had a massive stroke and we needed some help and caregiving for him, and he lived out of state. Couldn't do it from afar. I don't know the resources in that state. And so we hired a care manager, and she was able to really manage things. And my brothers and I came in town and visited and spent quality time with my dad and didn't deal with the day-to-day of his care. We had somebody else that we were able to hire to do that for us, and it worked out really well. So it is definitely something to consider. Another idea, and I've seen this happening in situations, is parents wind up moving up where the kids are. As the health really starts to decline, some of our parents, their friends have passed, and they don't have a lot of connections in the community that they're in, and maybe moving them to a senior retirement home nearby is more helpful. Susan, do you want to throw out some questions that have been in the chat?
Yeah, sure. So some of them are going to be addressed next week, but one is, what are the average charges for a care manager services?
So it varies by state and city. Ranges could be anywhere from $100 to $250 an hour. And I have often said to people, meet with a care manager for an hour, do a consultation with them, or at least with me, and you will get a wealth of information and a plan. The care manager doesn't always have to be the one executing the plan, but at least you'll have learned about resources and services and really how to navigate. So I think it's worth pulling, kids pulling a couple $100 together to be able to pick somebody, to be able to meet with a professional that knows what they're doing and what they're talking about. It really alleviates a lot of pain on your part.
And I have a question. How long do you typically stay with your clients? Is it for several years, or is it just to put a plan in place, or does it vary?
So it completely runs the gamut. I have clients that I work with long-term, and it runs the gamut with families involved and family out of state or no family at all. So it really just depends upon what the situation is and what the families want, really want for me to do. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll get involved. I'll help walk the family through the crisis, get things all stabilized, and then I won't hear from the family for another year or two. And then they'll come back because something else has come up and they need some more guidance. And so I'll kind of walk in and out. Amy just threw in their question, and I know that I had that question had kind of come up, and I just was seeing if there were other things in the chat as well. But so those of us that are reaching age 65 and have been with their doctor for 35 years or longer, and is this the time to really start thinking about hiring or finding a geriatric physician or a geriatrician? It all depends upon your doctor. If your current physician is really knowledgeable and you can ask and kind of get a sense from them, if they really understand the changes that occur as we age. Seniors, people 70, probably, I don't know exactly the age, but you start getting up there, 75, 80, 85, our bodies metabolize medications differently. Our organs aren't working as well as they used to, so our liver and our kidneys aren't functioning as well, and heavier doses of medications that you took when you're 65 don't process through our bodies the same way, and so a geriatrician is really tuned into that. But I think that some of our primary care docs may be knowledgeable as well. And so you really just want to kind of know your doctor and see who, how comfortable you are with them and how knowledgeable they are. Another thing you can do too is you can stick with your primary care doctor because you've known them for a really long time. Identify a geriatrician and go meet with the geriatrician and do a consult. Geriatrician is a specialist like your orthopedic, like your cardiologist. And so it may be beneficial to meet with somebody and talk with them and see, maybe what your regimen right now, according to that doctor, makes sense and you should continue with it. So it doesn't hurt to think about it. The other thing too that I know is that geriatricians tend to be really patient with their client or their patient. I mean, like really patient. They really listen, blow off aches and pains and comments that their patients come to them with. Whereas sometimes the younger doctors will do that. The doctors that treat younger patients will do that. Because there are some young geriatricians out there, so I don't want to put an age on them. Other questions?
The other ones are just about finding care, different options. We're going to discuss that in the program next week. But I know that we're getting on over an hour, so I don't know if if Amy and Beth, do you want to take more questions or about this?
Sure, we can take more questions.
About what's going on next week too, if it overlaps, is that okay?
Yeah, we can also, if you think of questions between now and then, we can ask Deborah to answer them, or they might be ones that Phyllis and Brad will be able to answer next week.
Also, we have Phyllis and Brad on this call.
Yeah,
So if
so
they want
Phyllis and Brad, why don't you wave?
if they want to give a plug for next week, what things
That would
are
be
going to be
great.
covered, then people know what they don't need to ask tonight. That would be helpful.
And before they do that, Phyllis, I know I see you taking yourself off mute. Let me just throw one other thing out. There was another question that was asked, and it had to do with a father starting to become forgetful and took a walk and got lost. I just want to throw out that as some of our parents are aging, some of the dementia is very subtle. And things that have occurred and that I've seen throughout my years is that I had a client who used to would bake a cake and bring it for Thanksgiving or the holidays. And one year when grandma came or mom came with this cake, it tasted terrible.
Mm.
It was an indication. The kids had no idea. They just figured, mom just made a lousy cake. Well, actually what was going on was mom was starting to develop dementia and omitted an ingredient or two. And so that was just like this real subtle indication that she was starting to have some cognitive decline. I've also seen where I've had children that are highly educated, and dad is coming and saying that the kids are saying, dad, you need to schedule an appointment with your doctor. Why haven't you scheduled the appointment with your doctor? We asked you to do that and you wanted to schedule this appointment. Well, dad's gotten to the point where he can't schedule it anymore. His mind is not functioning to be able to pick up the phone, dial the phone number, and schedule a doctor's appointment.
Yeah.
And so the kids were looking at it as dad being obstinate and stubborn and not listening, and dad actually couldn't do it anymore. So as you're visiting and the holidays are coming, we've got more holidays coming up. Pay attention to your parents' homes. Spoiled food in the refrigerator, piles of mail, that aren't being gone through. Those are like starting to be indications of cognitive decline. And you definitely want to step in there and get them assessed, cared for.
Thanks.
So, Phyllis,
Merle has a
take it away.
question. Yeah, those are all good points. Merle, you have a question. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Thank you. Deborah, you speak about how for you, discussing these things is normal and normative. It is for me as well. I coordinate the Chevra Kadisha at Anshe Emet Synagogue, which is a community Chevra Kadisha. And my granddaughters, since 2008, which would make one of them at that time was only 5, I have never used so-and-so past. Passing away is an avoidance of acknowledgement of the fact of death, of the inevitability even of death. And we needn't fear it. So how do we diffuse it? And I think one of the ways is by let's use the word. Let's call it by its real name. And we don't have to discuss whatever the scary parts are. But so even my granddaughters, I think, are just about in a position, the youngest one is now 16. I would trust any of them, even as my advocate, though I have named proxies.
Thank you for that.
Right, and yeah, that's a good point. And any other questions you can send to me or to one of us. Amy suggested Phyllis or Brad, do you want to wave and say just a little thing about next week? Unmute yourself if you want to say something.
Yeah, Phyllis was starting to say something.
All right. Well, all right. I don't see Brad unmuting, so I'll jump right in. First of all, Deborah, thank you. This has been very, very helpful, and I think that obviously it's been very useful to a lot of people. And so it was interesting. It was nice to meet you on the screen.
You as well, Phyllis. I know we've crossed paths in many ways over the years.
Yes, absolutely. When we were planning these 2 sessions, I kept on saying to Beth and to Amy, we're not going to answer all the questions in the world. There are a million questions and there are a million variations from each of you, either as the child of a parent or the parent of a child or somebody who's living on their own, as many of us are. But Brad and I will attempt to at least give you some of the language, a little bit of some of the funding sources, or how some of these places are funded, and hopefully educate all of ourselves on how to ask the right questions. Because we don't have, I've said this over and over again, we don't have a system in the United States. So you can't go to a book and figure out how to do this. There's no magic bullet. So what we'll try to do is to educate If you want to send Beth questions or Amy questions ahead of time, that will help us shape what we're doing. But I promise you, we will not be able to answer all of your questions, but we will try to answer or at least give you some information about how to get to the answers you need.
But you are going to talk about living options.
Yes,
'Cause that's what
exactly.
their
That's what we're
question is.
focused
Yeah.
on. We are focused on living options, and that's what we're going to be talking about.
And if I can jump in, Phyllis and I also talked about, ideally, we saw the two sessions being complementary, perhaps even nestled one inside the other. So Deborah just gave a wonderful and a very, compelling description of all the person-centric considerations, person-centric, both for, the person who might be hearing tonight and the person you might have been thinking about as Deborah was speaking. Part of our intention is to pull back the lens a bit and talk about the community considerations. Merle just touched upon community, talking about Anshe Emmett. We want to talk a little bit about community and what role community can and might be able to play. So we'll be talking, if you will, about aging in community as part of our focus.
That's great. And as both of them said, we can't answer every question, but this follow-up that Beth will send after the second program is going to list all of these resources that people have touched on, that people have sent to us, that we'll get next week. So each of the links are places that you can go to do your own research, and that will give you more information. And then you can look for your specific, questions to be answered, as opposed to, we're trying to be as general as possible so that everybody can take something away from these classes.
Deborah, this is wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And the idea of normalizing the conversation, not a one and done. And then all the things that we all need to put together too, is just wonderful. So thank you, thank you. A note to everyone is here. You're already registered. Next Monday afternoon, you'll get the link for next week's sessions, so you don't need to re-register. Deborah, thank you again. Phyllis and
You're welcome.
Brad,
Thank you.
thank you for being here too. So we're going to have a very comprehensive look, and it's good to have a whole week in there to digest all that you've shared with us. So very, very grateful to all of you. Thank you, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
See you
Good
next
night.
week.